Three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back and welcome to the Business Podcast and welcome back to the Business Podcast, the Business Method Podcast. I'm really glad to have you guys on the show today. Let me start that over. That was horrible.
Do it again, man. Do it again.
Three,
It doesn't
two,
always come off,
one.
right?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on today. I've actually been bedridden the past previous couple days, not COVID, but for some other stuff.
Oh, well, I hope you're
I'm,
feeling better.
yeah, I am. Thank you. Okay, three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business Method Podcast, or welcome back to the Business Method Podcast. We have a treat for you today. Patrick Comer. He is the founder of Lucid and a very successful entrepreneur. And as part of this series, we're interviewing a lot of eight-figure entrepreneurs, getting behind the mindset of eight-figure entrepreneurship. And he just told me that last year he moved from the eight-figure entrepreneur category to the nine-figure entrepreneur category. But that's okay. We'll still interview you. We
Well,
still
let
love
me
to pick
show
your
up. Oh,
brain.
good, good.
Yeah.
Well,
So
Chris, I'm very happy to be here. I think that mindset and thinking about how you make these transitions as a business scales and grows is pretty important. And it's also a challenge, I think, often for founders to know what's important as your business scales for everyone to be focused on. So I appreciate the theme and the format of this, but also the opportunity to talk a little bit about Lucid and also talk a little bit about how I've gone from 10 million in revenue maybe 6 or 7 years ago to crossing the $100 million revenue in 2020. So excited to be a part of the story.
yeah, I'm glad to have you here. And it always amazes me that mindset or just the journey of an entrepreneur going from, zero or wherever they start out at to hitting the six figures and seven figures, then mid seven figures and eight, and then on and on and on. And also their vision of the future of that, like how long can a lot of founders, because some founders are the type of founders that can stick around for 3 years and then they have to get out and start something new, and some founders are like, nope, 40 years, baby, I got this, we're taking Lucid to the moon. And so I'd love to chat about that, but I don't know a lot about your background. Did you grow up in an
Sure.
entrepreneurial family? I'm pretty sure you grew up in New Orleans, if I have that
Um,
correct.
Actually, as it turns out, my father is a priest, an Episcopalian priest, and so I grew
Yeah.
up, traveling around with him in church.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that my background, from a university standpoint, I have a degree in theater and a
Mhm.
degree in music.
Oh,
But
this
as
is
it turns
great.
out,
I love it.
so I
Yeah.
have no skills coming out of university or college
It's
in terms of
beautiful.
I didn't
Yeah.
take a single accounting class, economic, finance,
Yes.
I
I
no
love it.
business classes. But what happened is I moved to New York City to follow my dream, as it is the heartbeat of Broadway, and I was a theatrical carpenter for a number of years. But at that time in the late 90s is when the internet really happened, right?
Hmm.
Netscape went public and Silicon Alley was coined. And there were a lot of people in the early 20s like myself who thought we could also add .com to something and raise a bunch of money and figure it out.
Hmm.
So I was lucky enough to be involved with an early company in the .com era called GovWorks.
Okay.
And since then, I've been in technology startups, mostly in the B2B space, but really focused on how do you grow from an idea to really real revenue in the 10 to $20 million space.
Hmm.
Luckily, here with Lucid now in New Orleans, I've had the opportunity to be the scaling CEO. As you start out there are a lot of CEOs who love the startup time. And I got to
Right.
tell you, that's probably the most fun as CEO is like the first hires, like all the way from 0 to maybe 30 hires. And that could be any number of revenue levels that make that possible.
Hmm.
And some entrepreneurs think that's the best place to be and want to get out as soon as you start crossing over. I'd been there a number of times, and I really wanted to prove to myself, prove to those around me, and also prove to those investors who took a risk that I could also be the scaling CEO, that I could
Right.
take it to 100 employees, to 500 employees, and do that successfully.
Well, it's really interesting. So you started out going into theater and music. A lot of entrepreneurs start off knowing as a young age they're kind of entrepreneurial. Maybe they're selling golf balls or lemonade, at an early age, or or starting a business kind of right out of college. But it took you a while to kind of develop that. Did you maybe have that in the back of your mind when you were younger, or did where when did you realize, hey, I'm an entrepreneur?
The concept of entrepreneurship and business just wasn't the lingua franca of my childhood or growing up. It wasn't something that we were thinking about really.
Uh-huh.
The only version of entrepreneurship that I had is I was always creating the next club. I was always present. For example, I remember starting the debate club in high school, or in college, starting the next theater troupe, or really wanting to be the leader, wanting to be the director, wanting to be the kind of instigator, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
of something new. But it wasn't until the internet really popped, that e-commerce and the dot-com revolution occurred, that I realized something is really magical happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be a part of that story. And it was the, I guess, builder in me, the native builder that had not been focused on business before, that really gave me the opportunity to shine. But I started one of our first projects early in the dot-com era with my brother. And he brought me in because I could talk, right? He was the engineer and I was
Mm-hmm.
the brother with the theater degree, and I could stand up in theory in front of investors and say things where he wanted to make the back end work. So as the front man, I started to learn how to talk about business, how to talk about financing, and the rest. So I would love to say that I had a lemonade stand in my backyard for years and earning nickels and building something up, but that was just not my focus early on.
Was is so is Lucid the first business that you founded?
No, I've been involved with a
Okay.
number of different startups over the
Okay.
past 20 some odd years. Yeah.
Okay. And then where did the idea from Lucid come, and what made you think this would be like a key type of business that would take off?
Well, um, I thought Lucid was going to be successful because the market research industry, and when you think market research, think surveys and
Right.
polls, for
Right.
example, and that industry was very similar to the way the advertising industry worked.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in New York in the turn of the millennia, I saw the beginnings of the digital revolution in advertising,
Mm-hmm.
where digital ads became a thing. These were companies early like Avenue A and Razorfish.
Right.
And they started not only creating digital ads, but started creating new business models. Things like DoubleClick, where now there are exchanges and marketplaces where ads are made and placed in fractions of milliseconds on websites globally every day. I had seen that evolution and had started to work in the market research space in Los Angeles and realized that there is a high correlation between these two industries, how they worked, but there was no digital revolution necessarily happening at scale on the market research side.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved to New Orleans because I got married to someone from New Orleans. And that often happens down here, where she's the youngest of 12. And guess what? We're living in New Orleans now. So
Yeah.
started this company because I wanted to start it. I needed and wanted to start a new job and a new company down here. And the basic concept is that we could port this concept of a marketplace
Mm-hmm.
and move it into the market research space, and really take the programmatic scaling that we'd seen through ad tech and martech and point it to research. And that, of course, has become res tech, as everything becomes something tech these days.
Right. Did you start off with investments for Lucid, or did you come in just bootstrapping?
I raised a couple $100,000 out of the gate,
Mm-hmm.
friends and family, and a couple of local angels who were willing to take a gambit with me. But I got really lucky. Our first year we did around 1.5 million in revenue, and following year we did six. But that was mainly because I had the Rolodex and experience in the industry for about 7 years prior, so I was able to port that over a bit and move forward.
Yeah. Okay. And then I think so. You said in 2020 you just hit 100 million.
Yeah.
Um, in 2018, the stats I read, you had 250 employees, offices in New York, London, Delhi, Sydney, Singapore. Is that all still up to date?
Well, whatever an office means today, we're about to find out. That's right. But we
That's
have
true.
employees located in a bunch of countries globally. You know, we have a obviously large North America presence here based out of New Orleans, but we have a huge team in London,
Uh-huh.
a rather large team based out of Delhi as well, and scattered across APAC and other places. Probably about 14 or so different countries represented now.
Nice. Um, Patrick, was there? So I'd like to know. As you started out your first year hitting seven figures, which is pretty awesome. As you went from seven figures to mid seven to eight, even into nine, was there a shift in mindset for you? Because you guys started in 2010, is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so you're 11 years old, almost 11 years old. Um, what was that shift in mindset for you, and what were some of the benchmarks that went along with that? I think you mentioned 20 million was significant for you as well.
I think, well, benchmark number one was probably raising our Series A round after the first 18 months. So we
Okay.
raised just shy of $3 million in 2011
Okay.
um, from, uh, from Sopris Capital based out of New York. And I think one of the key things that every entrepreneur goes through is out of the gate, you are the jack of all trades. You're doing everything as the
Mm-hmm.
founder. Obviously, you have some skills and experiences that are relevant to some aspects of the role. But I found myself trying to figure out how to juggle well out of the gate because there's too many balls. And if I tried to juggle them all at once, I was definitely going to drop a few, and some of those may be quite problematic. So I had to learn how to focus on the few things that had to be done right now versus all the things that I might be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Once we got to say 20 million in revenue, the 15, $20 million range, it started to be less about what I was capable of doing every day and what the team was capable of doing, whether that is hiring the right people, whether that is creating the right processes, which I'm sure every entrepreneur loves to talk about, but really just thinking about how am I creating the environment where the team can be successful versus the environment where I'm successful in the job. Because it's less about what I do. The success of the business is in the hands of the people around me. And that becomes more and more true as the company's gotten bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Do you feel there was a mindset shift when you got past 20 million, say, 50, 60, 70 million, closer to 100 million?
You know, we spent a few years between 2011 until 2017 before we raised our $60 million Series B, which was
Mm-hmm.
led by Guidepost Growth Equity out of Boston. Um, and really by the time we got to the Series B, I'd gone through this transformation where everything that I had been good at in a role before, I now brought on someone else who was better than me and far more capable.
Yeah.
And I think at that time, the CEO's job is to figure out what the CEO's job is every 6 months or so, maybe a quarter every 6 months, because it's constantly evolving as the company scales up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the mindset is really how do I spend my time advancing the needs of the organization, and that can scale and change rapidly on a quarterly 6 month basis. But also the other mindset is, are we doing the right things today in order to build the business for the next 3 to 5 years?
Okay.
What are we missing about today that is going to be important in 2 years that we haven't started yet? And if we don't start now, we've got a problem. But the rest of the company probably doesn't see it yet because they're focused on this quarter, this month, today's activities.
Yeah. Um, in regards to replacing not only yourself but replacing key people or finding the key people that can run the operations of the business, what are ways that you do that? Because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and execs who have a challenge replacing themselves so they can focus on different roles in the business, or finding key executives to manage and run the business, that come from outside the company. So I'm just kind of curious, like where are you finding the talent to put into higher level roles for Lucid?
I think I've been extraordinarily lucky in terms of the quality of hiring and the capability of the team around me.
Okay.
Um, at the same time, I tend to manage through trust. and also the fundamental belief that everyone that works with me can achieve a new level of excellence above what they've done in the past, and maybe several levels up. So giving people the opportunity to really spread their wings and show you what they're capable of can create some fantastic results. And this is something I learned from my theatrical past, is if you ask people for their most creative performances, and you give them the trust and safety in the environment to perform at a new level, they will often exceed your expectations. So if you create that environment, people have the opportunity to succeed at the highest level of, say, awesome that they're capable of. But if you don't give them an opportunity, they will only perform at the level that you've given them access to. So early on, I didn't have a lot of access to experienced entrepreneurial management talent for a variety of different reasons. This is a startup based out of New Orleans, so the talent pool is radically different than, say, California.
Right.
And so it's really about inspiring people to do things they never thought they could do in the past, that really spread their wings and blossom. A tremendous example of that is our founding CFO, Christy Luquire, was with the business for 5 or 6 years, led us through our initial financing rounds. She had been with Wells Fargo as an investment banker and really said, I want to try to do this. And she knew more about banking and everything else than I did. So let's go for it. And she developed and grew with me over several years. Of course, there was a moment when it was time for her to move on personally and professionally, and we were able to bring in, a more qualified, more experienced CFO.
Yeah.
But she definitely led the team in a tremendous way for a number of years.
So you've been with the company, growing this company for 11 years.
That's right.
What's your vision for the next decade? Can you keep growing it, running how you're running for another 10 years?
I honestly am at my most excited point in the development of this business than since it was incepted back 11 years ago. Mainly because we had a vision for where not only Lucid could be, but where our entire industry could go. And now 10 years later, not only has Lucid developed into one of the primary players in ResTech and leading the digital transformation of market research, there are several other companies that are part of that transformation as well. And the next 10 years are going to be even more interesting than the first 10 because we're no longer proving our point.
Right.
We're now experimenting and developing the vision of the future. Because the first 10 years was a lot of sand uphill, pushing and pushing, like Sisyphus, just pushing that stone and rolls back a little, keep pushing.
That's what it's like.
We've now crossed over the top and it's rolling downhill a bit. And that's an exciting thing to see happen. And a lot of times when you're talking to investors, they can see how your business can grow within the current market, from 1 to 3 times the current size. But once you've actually changed the belief of an industry that can do something radically different, suddenly our market opportunity has grown by 10, 20, 30x in the past couple of years. As people's expectations of what they can achieve through data collection, through insights, through surveys has just radically changed. So honestly, I'm excited. I was told many times it's a marathon, not a sprint. And a 10-year, like, when was the last time you worked at a company for more than 10 years, right? That's a long stretch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Most people don't work that long in a single firm. So you have to find that spark of excitement, that spark of raison d'etre, that reason why you're here, besides the fact that you're the founding CEO and are passionate about it. And digging deeper into that well all the time is challenging, but immensely satisfying.
So when you do come up to that quote unquote wall or challenging time and you need to dig deeper to find that spark and reignite that, like, that's just something that we have to do in all long-term relationships, whether it's owning a business, marriage, whatever. What's the process for you look like?
Well, I think it took me a long time to recognize when I was bored and to be okay with not being satisfied with my job. Which is a really weird thing for the founder and CEO to be okay with, right? Because aren't all employees supposed to be super happy in their job all the time, much less the CEO, right?
Yes,
so
especially
the first step is saying it's really normal and okay for the CEO to wake up one day and be like, really? Right? And so It's okay. I think that's really step one,
I'm
to
so
like
glad you
know
said
that,
that.
to let
Yeah.
it's okay, and to recognize, wait a minute, what am I doing? And so letting go of having to be the super rah rah leader, visionary person every single day, even for yourself, and let it be, okay, today I'm not really excited about this, right?
Yeah.
And I should be excited because it's doing well, and or whatever, but I haven't found the excitement level today. So I guess that step one is recognition, right? And being okay with it and letting it take the time necessary to simmer. You don't have to
Hmm.
be resolving it today. And at a certain size, the company is kind of running itself. So you can spend the time, and this is probably the most important bit, take the time necessary to figure out what the job is now, what you love about that job, and go get interested in and go execute that new part of your role you didn't know existed before.
Right.
Um, and sometimes it can take a while. It can take some time for you to find that spark of interest in the thing you're doing again. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that completely. Sometimes like I'll become just completely complacent about the business, and I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? What did I do over the past X amount of years? And even podcasting as well.
Yeah.
It's like, because we're at over 400 episodes now. It's like, oh,
Bless you. 400 is a lot,
yeah,
man.
I know. And it's like, oh, another interview, another interview, another interview, and then I get into the interviews, and I always end up really enjoying it because I
Right.
just get a spark of knowledge from interviewing that person, and the conversation always turns out really good. But I think recognizing and accepting that that's part of the process of long-term growth, long-term being in a business long term, any type of relationship long term, like you're gonna have some lower times, and it's okay, right? And maybe even having conversations like this with other people that go through similar things is also something
I
that can really help people.
I'll double click right on that. I joined both entrepreneur organization and now YPO,
Oh
where other
yeah,
CEOs and leaders uh, put together really forums and small groups to
uh-huh.
let them have a safe space to talk about all the things that are going on, whether it's business or family or personal or otherwise. And I found that to be incredibly valuable, not only for my own personal, emotional life sanity, but also really learning from other skilled professionals how they handle various things as they come up.
Yeah, yeah,
Because as you probably heard many times, the founder and CEO can be an extraordinarily lonely journey.
hmm,
And when things are challenging, who do you get to, dare I say, complain to? Is it the board? Is it the investors? Is it the team around you? Where do you go to find a common ground with someone to really talk about what's going on in a safe environment? And I've found engagement with other CEOs and executives in those environments to be extraordinarily valuable.
yeah, absolutely. Do you know anybody from EO out of Austin?
I do not know anyone that I can think of out of Austin. One of my forum pals is actually from Dallas, so I get over there for vacation. It sounds like you
Okay.
know EO and EO.
Yeah, well, we interviewed Vern Harnish, but one of my good
Of course, yeah.
friends is, I think he's on the board or is in a leadership role here in Austin. His name's Peter Keller. So I just thought
Okay.
I'd ask to see if you know.
I don't know Peter, but maybe I should.
Yeah, why not? Okay, so what's your then? Do you think you can grow this into $1 billion company, Lucid?
Well, that's the plan. Like literally,
Uh,
we are putting together our strategy for growing to $1 billion of revenue in the next 5 years.
nice. When you hit 1 billion, come back on the podcast and
I'll
let me.
come back. I'll come back and tell you what were the mindset shifts to go from 100
Yes.
to a billion, right?
Well, that's the next series. We want to do 100 people that have built
That's right.
$1 billion companies. So,
That's right. That's right.
yeah, so that's fascinating. Okay. Um, what, so I'd like to know more about kind of what your daily habits are like, your daily routines, how you operate on a day-to-day basis. Do you have a daily routine that you have in place to keep you going? And how do you balance your life? Are you a CEO that's just all business all the time, or you're like max 8 hours and I got to spend the evenings with family sort of guy? How do you operate?
I'll start with the latter question.
Okay.
When I started Lucid in 2010, we had recently moved to New Orleans. I had a 18-month-old daughter, and my son was 6 months away.
Mm-hmm.
And so, literally, we started the company in like February, and my son was born in June.
Mm-hmm.
And I took paternity leave, which freaked out the early team, of course, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I had been a part of startups and professional environments where the work hours were intense and long.
Okay.
And I wanted to see if we could do something different in Louisiana. Because if you've been down to Mardi Gras, if you've been down here, you know that the culture is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And the priorities of people down here are not about the number of hours you necessarily work, but really about the relationships that you build and the
Mm-hmm.
community that you support. So my big question and my early kind of challenge was, how do you marry the needs of a fast growing startup in terms of time and energy and output with the culture of Louisiana, of laissez-faire and Mardi Gras?
Right.
And so I made a commitment to myself that I would walk out of the office every day at 5:30, every single day. And I remember speaking to Christy Luquar, just looked at me like I was crazy. All the stuff that needed to be done, I just walk out and go home. Now, sometimes I'd, of course, log back in, but over the years, that's actually decreased. And so most of my evenings are not spent on today's fire or, evening situation, but more about spending time with my family. And I'm grateful for that. What I've experienced several times is that a company's founder creates the amount of time the company needs from them. So if as a founder, you're going to spend 100 hours a week building the business, then all the systems, all the expectations, all the processes that you've built around you requires that 100 hours from you.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it gets bigger and more embedded, it's harder to shake that, because that's the situation. Now, you may love that, go for it, right?
Right.
But you also may burn yourself out.
Yeah.
So I'm no longer a believer that you've got to burn the midnight oil to build a fast growing, highly valuable startup, wherever you may be.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. I was just taking some notes here. I'm not checking my phone just so you know.
No worries. You can check your phone too, man.
No, no, no.
Um,
I wouldn't do that. No.
so it was really that cultural shift that I was trying to experiment with. And I've got to be honest, this company still takes Mardi Gras off. And the rest of the world has no idea when Mardi Gras Day is, right?
Right.
And yet our team still does it, because here Mardi Gras is important, not just because it's a day off, but it's part of the cultural ebb and flow and rhythm of the city.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I like how you said that. I don't know if this is the exact quote, but you said a company's founder creates the culture of the time that the company can rely on the founder or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
basically, the company will form around you.
Right.
And that part of what it's forming around is its values and its culture, but also the time required from the founder to do whatever the business is doing.
So you're taking it roughly, just kind of have the policy to take off at 5:30 every day.
Yep.
When are you coming in? And
Well, these days I usually um, get in around 8, whatever that means. It's hard to know what these things mean anymore to an office given the pandemic
COVID.
scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I drive my kids into school every single day
Okay.
and drop them off. And then most days I have a phone call starting at 8 a.m. So it's like
Hmm.
8 to 5:30.
So you get
But
your
I
eight
also,
eight hours in every day.
but I'm also taking significant time, especially during COVID, take lunch with my wife. And then we've also been working out during lunch hours as well. So there's a good 4 hour kind of chunk in the morning and good 4+ hours in the
In the
afternoon.
evening.
And that's pretty much there. Right.
Do you have challenges bringing work home with you? You said you mentioned you used to sometimes log in when you got home. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs burn out. This is probably why many entrepreneurs can't make the 11 year mark, because they're so invested emotionally into their business, they can't separate themselves from it. Um, and you had that solid 5:30 mark. I'm going home. I'm going to spend time with my family for the
Yep.
most part.
Yep.
Um, when you get home, is it easy to separate the two? Is it easy to say, okay, this is family time?
It was easier when there was a commute I could have the downtime of say 45 minutes to let the days, whatever, flow through,
Decompress. Yeah.
decompress. Now I mainly work out of my garage, and so the 2 minute walk from my garage to the house isn't long
It's
enough time to.
different.
So I find myself, is one of my frustrations is my son or daughter are trying to communicate with me or show me, and I want, but then that thing, whatever it is still on my mind that I haven't really left. Um, so it's always a challenge, and I would say that as the company has gotten bigger, um, the size and scale of the issues, positive and negative, are just bigger, right?
Yeah.
And so they can be weigh as heavily as some of the startup issues were, which may have been seemed quite small at the time, but were heavy in terms of the potential, impact to the business.
Yeah. Interesting. If you weren't doing this, if you weren't building Lucid, what would you be doing?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Mm.
I've spent like so long building businesses. It's like literally the thing that I do, right?
Right.
So if I weren't doing Lucid, I'd be building someone else's company with them, right? I'd be involved with something else, right?
Yeah.
But I have taken to over the past 4 years or so taken to beekeeping. So that's one of my favorite pastimes because it requires as much or as little time as you would like to work with bees, and so it's a good habit to take on because I can leave them for months on end and they'll be fine, or I can visit them daily and engage.
That's a great way to get out of the work mindset. Go surround yourself with a bunch of bees. Like you're not going to
Oh
be
yeah,
thinking about anything else.
that's well yeah. Bees are cool too, and they make honey, and my friends make mead, so there's a lot of benefits as well.
Ah, very cool. Very cool. What else would you like to share about Lucid and what you guys have going on? Anything in particular?
Um, One thing I've noticed over the years is how, especially from an entrepreneurial mindset, most founders don't understand how much research or data collection they can do about their target market or audience early on. It's
Mm-hmm.
starting to click in around UX design and research, where early in a company's lifespan, they're actually speaking to potential customers at scale.
Okay.
And when I explain to founders that you can literally talk to anyone on the planet right now about any topic at scale and for relatively inexpensive kind of cost points, suddenly the light bulb goes out is that they don't just have to have a vision, they can measure their vision, or they can understand whether or not their product's going to be engaging for their target audience or target customer. And
Right.
so we're starting to see how what we would call research, but it's really asking who your customer, who you think they will be, what they like or dislike about your product, your ideas, your vision. Getting that feedback early and often is a way for executives and founders today to be extraordinarily competitive.
Yeah.
Competitive.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's just a valuable knowledge to have to help people get, for so long, so many companies just do not do that. Get into the minds of their customers and competitors and understand what's working, what's not working, what makes them tick. Um, what are
Well, even today, it's happening with in terms of podcasts,
Yeah.
where you may not have a firm understanding of who your audience is, what they think about your shows or your themes, how they're
Mm-hmm.
increasing or growing, because you have no reasonable way to ask them questions.
I know. Yeah.
And so literally that's Lucid's job, is to provide access to your audience so you can learn A, who they are, but
Mm-hmm.
also B, engage with them on how to develop the product and content that you are providing.
Yeah, that's incredible. How are you guys? So? What I love about this concept is that you guys. I mean, you're not doing the research yourself, right? You're
No, we do
going
no
out there.
research.
Yes, exactly. So we interviewed Richard Koch, who's the author of the 80/20 principle recently.
Okay.
And in his new updated version of that book, I don't know if you ever read that book, but I'm sure you know
I
the
did not.
concept.
I do know the
Um,
principle. Yeah.
yeah. So in his updated version, he thinks anybody that he mentions anybody that would start a business that's not a network type of business is crazy in today's day and age. So this is what you guys are doing. You're
Yep.
taking A and B and putting them together And because you put them together, you provide this great platform to do it and making it easier for A and B. And then there's a massive amount of people that want to come your way because you've made that easier. The same as Uber, same thing. A and B, they're putting Uber to, right? There's a platform, there's an app, go there, it makes it easy. The driver and the passenger get connected just like that. Uber's a multi-billion-dollar company that doesn't make any money, but I'm guessing you guys make some money. You're profitable.
We do, yes.
Okay, good, good. But I think it's genius, and we're going to see more and more of these as time goes on because it's kind of like being the middleman is the best option now. Being the person, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but like
No,
this, what Lucid has done is making it easier for these two parties to connect in order to understand how they can, grow their own companies, right?
well, it's a hard challenge building a two-sided marketplace with network effects embedded in of any industry of any type is a challenge because you
Right.
have to figure out how to solve the chicken and the egg. What comes first, supply or demand? How do you get that flywheel actually moving out of the gate?
Right.
And what's been interesting is to see flywheels built atop of flywheels. So, it's almost normal. We wouldn't even talk about it, the fact that Lucid runs on AWS as an example, which is its own marketplace and flywheel. And so what I'm really trying to say is the number of network effect driven businesses that are possible is also growing. So from an entrepreneurial optionality standpoint, the number of opportunities is scaling even faster now than it was before because all the infrastructure that you need to build a business or connect with your customers or research all these things that you would need that used to be slow and challenging are now also network effect. They're also marketplaces.
Right.
So the whole process of all the functions of the business are being stripped down essentially to APIs and processes that anyone can use to build all these new types of services.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to start companies now because the barrier to entry to start is smaller than it's ever been. The opportunities are only scaling, not shrinking. And your ability to get support and help is at an all-time high. I mean, when I first got into entrepreneurship, if you went in, the turn of the millennium, if you bought Entrepreneur magazine, it was about franchising, right?
Right.
And so in 20 years, the word entrepreneur has now dramatically shifted in terms of expectations of what you can do. And the support around you and the knowledge sharing, like this podcast, an example, is a part of that support infrastructure for the founder that never existed before.
Yeah. Being that what you guys have went through in the pandemic in the past year, do you think so? We've interviewed a lot of companies that are remote companies that do not have offices, employees around the world, and you've went in the past year really to kind of having those offices, having a large, massive team all around the world, to people not going into the office. So,
That's right.
do you think what have you learned from this new model having to operate like this, and do you think you'll continue to operate without those offices?
I'll say the first thing I really learned, I think we all learned, is a level of compassion and empathy for each other.
Okay.
It's hard not to be human beings when your kids and dogs are on your lap during calls, right? It's so suddenly it went from a
It's
more
true. Yeah.
formal professional environment to, I've got to go, chase my cat just left out, got outside, right? These things, we all became
Yeah.
very human, right?
Right.
And as I was talking to our customers and employees and teams globally, no one escaped. It wasn't like there's a part of the world that got off scot-free from the pandemic, right? Everyone is in this together. And now it's different scale, but it's the same or similar experience. We were challenged as a company trying to become more global. And one of the many silver linings of the pandemic around being a forced remote environment is we became a decentralized global company literally overnight.
Right.
Where whether or not you were in an office, a state or country or place was utterly irrelevant to your ability to perform.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to achieve this result because what happens in offices is those who are in the office have a different experience around communication, decision-making, authority, whatever it may be. So COVID just blew up the office model. And for us, the benefit was we were all equally remote everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, as in the US, the vaccination rate continues to expand. I think people are getting more comfortable with the concept of going back to an office. I asked the question myself, are we all supposed to be together in the same place like we were before for X many hours a week? I've grown accustomed to like a new routine, right? I get to
Yeah.
work out at, 12:30, 3 times a week, which is fantastic. Do I want to now how do I want to readjust the balance between remote and office?
Yeah.
But also talent. I'm sure you've heard this several times. The world is our talent pool now. If you don't have a bias towards place, you can hire from anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, the catch to that rule is so can everyone else,
Yeah.
and from you as well. So the competition for talent has only scaled up in the past year as well.
Yeah. So what do you think you guys will do? You think you'll lean towards staying more remote, or we?
Oh, I'm sure my chief people officer would reprimand me for giving an exact answer. Since we don't know is the clear thing, but let me give you some of the things that go across my brain. Right, one is it's been good to give people the flexibility to be remote.
Right.
And I don't want to, especially those who are not anywhere near one of our offices, I'll put those in air quotes. I don't want that experience to be diminished because a lot of us are now every day coming into a room that you can't get access to.
Yeah.
Right. At the same time, there are just certain parts of work that are better in person, besides just seeing each other, which is glorious when you get to see people, especially those you haven't seen in a while. But things like brainstorming and some of the engagement you can do, ideation, some of the meetings that you can have are just more compelling in person than would ever be remote.
Yeah.
So the question for me is not an either or scenario. We're going to all remain fully remote or everyone comes back to an office. It's more, how do we strike the right balance of needs of the company and needs of the individual, so that we can continue to really bring on talent globally successfully, but also have those special in-person moments that are beautiful from how they drive the business forward. But let's be honest, we're all human beings. Being together is wonderful.
Yeah.
And a lot of people thrive on the social environment of the in-person office, and they, like many of us, miss it. I don't
Yeah.
know what the right balance is. I'd be lying if I told you I had the answer, but what I will be leading is a path to get to strike that right balance between the two.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think, like, I've talked to a lot of remote companies, and a lot of times they'll miss the in-person stuff. They'll crave it and they'll think, oh, maybe this is a time we should now start to do in-person offices and in-person events on a regular basis. And then vice versa, of course, so many people have worked in office, and, the
Yep.
flexibility to work from home and, exercise in the afternoon and do laundry while you work is pretty,
Laundry
pretty,
while I work is
pretty
good.
nice for a lot of
Yeah, I
people.
bet.
Yeah. So,
I've just now experienced the equalization, the democratization of a meeting when everyone is remote at once. No, no people are in a room.
right.
I've also experienced where I'm the remote person and there are 6 people in a room, and that's not as good, right?
Right.
So it's almost like everyone should be there or everyone should not be there physically, as it were.
Yeah.
So how to not make combo hybrid even worse than either or is one of
Yeah.
the key challenges as well, right?
Well, maybe 3 days in, 2 days out, or vice versa, 3 days out, or something like that.
Yeah. I'm sure there'll be what I do know is there's gonna be lots of experimentation on this, right, over the next couple of years.
Yep.
And I'm sure lots of opinions will be formed in different companies doing different things based on what,
And you'll have a lot of case studies to use as examples. As
Oh,
well.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure we won't argue at all about what was the right thing to do. So.
Excellent. So, Patrick, any other tips as a high performing entrepreneur? What time do you wake up in the morning? You wake up the same time every morning?
So I'm a creature of habits. My one tip is not which habit of mine should you take on, but I'm a believer in habit forming and being intentional about, okay, if I form this habit, I can repeat it over time. It's a value add for XYZ reason.
Absolutely.
So I don't spend a lot of time trying to copy what other people do, but because I don't think necessarily what I do will fit for you or vice versa.
Right.
But it's really, I love habits. I love being intentional about forming them. building a habit over time and watching the results come in over repetition.
How do you specifically build a habit?
Um, I think the biggest thing is identify what it is that I want to achieve and visualize the outcome or the change. And then literally, what's the first step? I think I often get overwhelmed with doing it all.
Yeah.
Even before this podcast, I have a project that I'm working on that I'm overwhelmed by because it's so big. And I just broke it down to, all right, what's the first step? What's the smallest first step that I need to achieve?
Right.
With habits, I'm a data analysis junkie. I run a research company. What can I say? So if I can make it something that I can track via data and a chart and drive analysis from, then I just do it more often because I love looking at how it evolves over time.
Right. I do too. To track that, any specific habit, is there any platform do you use? You're like, do you make a spreadsheet and follow that, or are you looking for certain apps that may be related to that habit? Just curious.
I often tend to just pull it into a spreadsheet because
Yeah.
it's rare that the app has the level of analysis that I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to find widgets, whether it's Zapier or some other way of pulling data into spreadsheets and then working my own little analysis on it. So
Can you give us an example of a habit that you did that with? Because I think a lot of people, not to pry into the habits that you create, but I think people could be inspired by that. And one of the reasons why goals usually fail is because people don't have some sort of accountability and tracking system that they can see progress with.
well, I always say the biggest first step is not achieving the goal,
Mm-hmm.
but starting the tracking. It's like
Right.
in the business, right? If you can set all the goals you want to, but if you don't know a way to track and measure against progress,
Mm-hmm.
you, what are you even doing?
Right.
So it's the same thing in my own personal habits. The first step can often literally be, how am I going to track it? Am I tracking the right thing? So a simple one is like weight, right? That's something people obsess over or not obsess over, right?
Right.
But if I can step on a scale every morning, even if I have no goal, right? There's no objective, just
Uh-huh.
measure the thing, right? If I can step on a scale that will then send to a spreadsheet the actual weight number for the day, and just what one thing I've often said in an organization, the human behavior is that if you just show people the number, they will start behaving to move the number in
Yeah.
various ways. For
Mm-hmm.
example, with sales, sometimes you can set goals and targets and quotas, but if you just literally show every salesperson's number and quota delivered for the period, month or quarter, or whatever, and just put it on the board, you don't even have to talk to it.
Right.
They will automatically start trying to move the number because we're creatures who want to see a number and then move and do something with it.
Yeah.
And so I just try to do the same thing with myself, which is if I just show myself the number, I may change my habit. And weight's a great example where people often want to lose weight. Even with no goal, if you just show yourself the number every day, that may inspire different behavioral choices throughout the day. So you don't move it a different direction that you want to see, right? So
Mm-hmm.
some of it's just measuring the thing versus actually setting or even achieving the goal.
I love that. I love that. That's one of the reasons why I don't step on the scale every single day, because it'll drive me nuts. If I,
It'll
you
drive you
know,
nuts.
why? Yeah, I'm like, why am I 3 pounds heavier? Why am I two?
Yeah, yeah. Why is it
Like,
fluctuating? What's happening to me, right?
yeah,
But I do it because it reminds me that I care and that maybe there are choices I can make during the day that would impact, what I want.
mm-hmm.
But it's just the habit, right? If I do it every time, then I'm creating the habit, and so every morning it's like ritual. Some people may call me boring or fastidious or
No, I think
habit
that's
forming,
genius.
but it's just
I think that's a start. It's like what gets measured gets managed, right? I think that's
that's the
the
real thing. I could have, yeah.
yeah, like the start of any goal is like, what's that number? What's that figure? And look at it on a regular basis, and how have you moved on a daily basis?
We do this in the business all the time, which is not what should the number be, but can we measure it right now? And
Mm-hmm.
usually, almost always, the first answer is, I don't know, let me find out. And then we figure out how to measure it. Then we look at the measure over time and say, what has it done? And then we set a target and goal, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the measuring for me that's important versus how you're setting goals and whether or not you're achieving them.
So if you like have a goal in the company, you first measure it, and then you figure out, or if it's measurable, and then you figure out how to measure it. How then do you, I would guess, say, hold the team accountable?
Well, accountability, but we could talk an entire other podcast on accountability within
Yeah.
your teams, right?
Okay.
And I'll just start it by saying, typically I've been terrible at accountability. So I'm not the authority on how to hold people accountable.
Okay.
Um, but what I have been learning to do is once there is a measurable goal, is to have everyone that I work with in my management team share exactly what those goals are for themselves for the period, say the quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And because there is mutual understanding of what we're working against, we can help each other get to those outcomes, but we can hold ourselves accountable for, as we move through the quarter, if we keep looking at those goals, why are we, or why not are we achieving them? Now, sometimes we don't achieve the goals because of outsized situations, right? It's not
Right.
your fault the goals are not achieved. It's COVID or whatever the answer is, right?
Right.
Sometimes it is, but usually most of the time, it's not for lack of effort. It's not for lack of this or that the goal, the target's not achieved. It's because we did not understand how hard or what the real challenge was when we started.
I like that.
So I think, and this is, I'm sure there's lots of different arguments on this, is it's not necessarily about hitting or achieving the goal. It's, are we learning what impacts the goal along the way? What's
Yeah.
really the root cause? And are we impacting that? Because
like
if I just hold you accountable for the target or the goal, and then you reprimand you or money or whatever the things are you give and take around accountability, we may achieve the result, which is more like winning the battle but losing the war.
Mm-hmm.
But once we start realize we're not hitting, like what's actually going on? What's the root fundamental cause? And if we see what's going on there, we may fix a root cause, which unlocks a huge amount of growth. Yeah, we missed the target for the month or quarter. That's irrelevant. We found the actual solution, which is now going to drive growth for and unlock success going down the road.
Yeah.
So it's this arts and science. It's like product development. Do you hit every quarter's product release schedule or not? And it's how much of it is going to be art and how much of this is going to be science, and balancing the two is like the nature of leadership in my book.
I love that. I think that is a beautiful way to wrap up the podcast. That was an incredible statement.
Right on, right
Patrick, I loved this interview. I had a really good time and learned so
Likewise, my
much on
friend.
the show. If the listeners want to reach out and learn more about what you guys have going on over at Lucid or connecting with you, what's the best place they can do that at?
Sure. Personally, my Twitter handle is Comer Patrick. Very straightforward. And then our website is a URL hack, which means it's luc.id.
Yes.
So luc.id is our URL hack. So come check out our products and services if you think they might be interesting.
I think that's a great brand name too, Lucid. And I
There's
love
a
the
whole
domain
story
as
of how our head of marketing stayed up very, very late one night to get an Indonesia 3-letter URL back in the day. So
Was he lucid dreaming while it happened?
I sure hope so.
Cool. Well, Patrick, thank you again so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all your tips and tricks and wisdom with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure, Chris. Onward. Take care of yourself.
And listeners, thank you guys for tuning in once again, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.